I met Joyce because I was traveling back and forth to the Caribbean a lot because I had this place on the Caribbean. So typically when you would come back from the Caribbean, your plane would take you to San Juan, and then from San Juan you'd fly up to Boston. That's still true. So what happened is I'm in a plane. It's a Lockheed 1011, which was a jumbo jet with 3 big engines. And it had the following seating inside: 2, 5, and 2 in the main cabin. I had the window seat with the 2. And I noticed as the plane is just about full, I have the only empty seat I can see, and I'm very happy to have an empty seat next to me instead of some fat person who squeezes me in or something like that. So I'm sitting in the airplane waiting to go, and then this person comes onto the airplane at the very last instance. And it's obvious to me this is a person who's never been to the Caribbean because they're wearing a overcoat. And, you know, she stops to talk to her friends that she had some friends who were at the same college, and they were flying back on the same airplane, but they were from Puerto Rico. And then she came back and she sits down in the seat next to me, but she has all this junk with her. So I get up, I help her put stuff in the overheads, you know, stuff like that. And it turned out that the reason she looked strange is she had on an overcoat. I said, where are you from? And she said, St. Thomas. I said, well, don't you know it's hot? And what are you wearing an overcoat for? And then she explained to me, she had bought this coat in a thrift store for $1, you know, and it needed a lining. It was a beautiful coat, but the lining was shot. So she went and bought this cloth and sewed up a beautiful lining for this coat. And her mother had earned some money as a seamstress for a while, and she wanted to show her mother her handiwork. So she brought the coat down to show her mother how she had sewed a lining. And then when she was going back to school, she had this coat with her and too much junk to pack. This is typical of people going back and forth. So she decided she'd have to wear the coat. So she's really perspiring because it's about 105 outside, you know. So that's how I met Joyce, because we were seated next to each other on an airplane. So the first thing I noticed about her is we happened to be seated at a seat that was over the landing gear. So as the airplane took off, when the gear came up,
Sit back a little bit.
yeah.
Sit back a little
Oh, yeah. When the gear came up, it makes a noise, you know, and anytime the airplane made some noise or turned or something, she was terrified. She was certain it was about to crash. So I would calm her down and say something like, listen, that's just this, or something. Then finally I told her, I said, listen, there's a way to get over this fear of flying. She said, how? I told her, get your pilot's license. She eventually did. How some miracle. Well, Joyce has been extraordinarily helpful in general. But I don't know about my career being helpful.
Then give me the general.
Okay. Well, in the beginning, I was much involved in a lot of business enterprises as well as academics. You know, I was a professor at MIT when I met her. In fact, I remember when I met her, you know, she asked, what did I do? And I said, well, I'm a professor at this university, you know. And I think she didn't believe me, or she took that with a grain of salt. So later, when she wanted to get a job, I told her, to try Raytheon or something like that. And she decided to contact me. So she calls MIT, tells them my name, and then my phone rings, and I answer it. So we went out to lunch. I didn't want to marry her. She may have wanted to marry me for some reason. I don't know why. Basically, I remember just that she was very bright, So we met on that plane, and I'd given her some advice. I said, well, she wanted to know a place she could interview, and I suggested Raytheon because I knew some people there, and so on. Okay, so then she calls me. She finds me at MIT by calling MIT and saying, "Is there a Professor Fredkin there?" And there was, so she calls me, and she wants to meet me. So I decide, okay, we'll meet at this restaurant. Well, so we go there, and she starts asking me questions. She says, "Are you married?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm married." She says, "Okay." Then she says, she asked me, "Oh, so what are you doing having lunch with me?" I said, "I don't know." She said, "Good, let's have lunch." So that's how I met her. We met on that plane, and then I gave her some advice to try Raytheon and so on. And then she contacted me because she was pretty certain I was a fraud or something. So the woman I was married to, I knew that wasn't working and it wouldn't work out. And we were actually separated before I met Joyce, really. Feynman was sort of my best friend at that time, and so I asked him if he'd be best man at my wedding, and he agreed. So he had to come out to the wedding, So he and his 2 children and his wife all head out to the Caribbean, and we're going to get married. And Joyce insisted that I get married in a church in the little town in the British Virgin Islands, because all her relatives lived around there. And I remember Joyce had this expression. She would say, I said, what's the point of getting married in the British Virgin Islands? She says, well, if we don't get married here, every time we come down to the British Virgin Islands, all these people will say, she says she's married. Yeah, but so they had to see me get married. So it's decided, I'm easygoing, so whatever she wanted, okay. So my parents, my father and my family all came out. My sisters, I don't remember if my brother came, but all the family came out that could. And the Feynmans came. They stayed on Mosquito Island with us. And then a funny thing happened. We had to be interviewed by the person who was going to marry us in the church, but she wanted a church wedding. Okay. So he's interviewing Joyce and me. So first he wants to interview me, and he's asking me questions, and I'm answering them, That's sort of a kind of obnoxious thing. And then, and Joyce is sitting there quietly while he's asking me questions, And then he starts asking Joyce questions. And then he says to me, first he says to Joyce, you know, you're marrying a very rich man. Does that bother you? Are you after his money or something like that? And Joyce is being, you know, finding this all disgusting, you know, because he was a very young guy, you know, younger than me certainly, and probably younger than Joyce. And he's asking, pretending he's a big wheel, but he's from her church. You know. So then he turns to me and then he says to me, okay, are you marrying this woman because of the increased social status that will accrue to you for marrying a belonger? I said, are you kidding, you know? So, but Joyce was listening. So she calls her mother up, and I happened to hear this call. It went like this: Mommy, what's a belonger? Okay, here's what Mommy says. Oh, the English people there, they have such foolishness, you know. A belonger means a person that's born in the British Virgin Islands, as opposed to a immigrant or something like that. Okay. So she was very happy that, you know, she was a belonger. So we're going to get married there in the church. And she was very fussy about what music they would play. She didn't want one of these long weddings. So, I remember some other things. I just had some minor surgery, so she mentioned it. She was trying to figure out what she could say to the pastor to get this wedding to not be one of these things that went on and on and on for hours. So she said, you know, my husband-to-be just had some surgery. And the pastor then says, oh, and he would have trouble standing up for all those songs you want to sing, you know. So then he says, okay, we'll arrange for a chair so he can sit during the ceremony then, if he can't stand. And Joyce is thinking, oh, that's big deal. You know, if he's in a chair sitting, everyone will say she's married someone who's too old to stand up, you know, and so on. So she wouldn't go along with that either. So finally, you know, all the details got worked out. She got to choose the music and so on. And then he calls us up and he says, I have to delay the wedding. And I said, why? He says, well, since your husband is divorced, your husband-to-be has had a divorce, I can't marry you without permission of the bishop. So, where's the bishop? He said, well, the bishop is normally down in Barbados, that's a British island. And, but he's not there. He's on vacation somewhere. No one can find him now. So the wedding's postponed indefinitely. Now, there is at Mosquito Island, my parents, my family, the Feynman, his wife and family, all down for this wedding. And this guy just tells us it's postponed indefinitely because we can't find the... So I say to Joyce, I'll find him. So I made a bunch of calls, and I found where he was on vacation, which was the British Virgin Islands. So when I got him on the phone, he instantly gave his permission to this. And so the wedding was rescheduled for the original date, and we got married. Then here's one other episode that happened. I noticed that in the BVI, I had never seen anyone ever wear a tie. It was a very hot climate. No one ever wore a tie. So I didn't want to wear a tie. So Joyce has a fit. She says, you have to wear a tie. No. I said, really? I don't even have a tie. So she complains to Feynman's wife about me not wanting to wear a tie. So Feynman lends me a tie, and I wore his tie to get married.